Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim, I want to pick up on something that Kate said before the break, which is that it seems like America and Americans now have two different lenses through which they view the world and history. And I'm starting to wonder whether this is going to be a skirmish in the curriculum wars. And we've already had some controversies. I think the AP US history curriculum that came out was a controversy a few years ago, and there was a push-pull on each side of that. Do you think that we're going to get more of this in the future?
Yeah, well, let's also remember that we've had plenty of it in the past, okay? Curriculum wars are nothing new. You often have states pushing back against either national organizations that are trying to influence the way textbooks are written or against certain standards that come out of the federal government in terms of how education is handled. So we've certainly had plenty of that in the past. I think, though, that what this is it's something different and a new stage in these wars for a couple of reasons. One, because it's about a new topic, okay? It's about no longer the question of how America simply is presented in textbooks, which has been what a lot of the fights have been in the past, in particular over history curriculums, but rather about an entire agenda that certain elements of the country, progressive movements, are trying to insert into education. So it's not really about like just the view of America as a country, but rather an entire ideology that goes into economics, that goes into questions of racism, that goes into questions of equality and inequality or equity, as it were. So it veers into economic issues, it veers into history issues, it veers into culture issues, and they're trying to foist it on the country. So I think this is a new stage of these wars. I think what also is different is the degree to which states are becoming more proactive about doing something about this. In the past, often these were fights that were actually held at the school board level, sometimes at the level of the state education, but it was more about pushback and mandates that came out of offices that directed school districts to buy this kind of textbook and not that kind of textbook. Now we're actually having laws passed, like what was in Florida, that is trying to sort of safeguard against this bigger takeover. And I think you're going to see a lot more states engage in that and follow Florida's lead.
The other question that this raises in my mind, Kate, is how this fits into the argument for school choice. And again, there are state education standards that apply to all sorts of public schools in Florida or Illinois, for example, that there's also a lot of local variation. And the AP course doesn't quite fit into this framework because it's layered on top of that. That's something that a class that people take at all sorts of different schools. But it does make me wonder as we're talking about these divisions between Americans and parents of different ideological views, whether that is the only way forward here is instead of having one government school and one curriculum, you're going to end up in a situation where people find that intolerable and you have a flowering of a thousand flowers, maybe the way to say it. Different schools, different approaches, different curriculums. And we're already seeing a lot of that, especially in states like Florida, where they have robust school choice. But maybe that is what the future looks like.
Yeah, Kyle, I think one thing to remember is that we ran a piece after DeSantis won an op-ed in 2018 talking about how DeSantis's very narrow margin of victory over Andrew Gillum may have been decided by Black moms who supported school choice, which was a signature issue of DeSantis's. I do think, to your point, it would be really therapeutic for the country to have more competition in education and allow families to have more choices about what works best for them. That would certainly turn down the temperature that we're seeing on school board races if all parents, regardless of income, felt like they had other options if the local traditional school wasn't working for them. I think that is one core reason why we're seeing as much acrimony as there is now, because it's expensive to pay for private school. Not everyone can do that. And there are sometimes limited other options for parents. So I do think it would be very healthy to have a competition of schools. And we also might get to have more knowledge about what really is working well for students. And some of these schools could succeed or fail on their own terms. It'd be much more healthy than the current monopoly system we have that I think has led to some of these high stakes fights.
Kim, what do you make of the politics here? Ron DeSantis is a canny political operator, and it seems that he is positioning himself potentially to run for president, run for the White House in 2024. And school choice has been a big issue for him. And I guess also public education. He also recently proposed a teacher's bill of rights, spending an extra $200 million on teacher pay, and exchange for that some reforms so that teachers' unions can't take pay out of people's paychecks without them seeing it first. And Kim, I wonder what you think of the way that he's positioning himself on education.
It's very savvy because for all the whining and moaning and outrage that gets expressed in the liberal press and also, via these other governors like J.B. Pritzker, you mentioned in Illinois, as you can see from the recent election, Ron DeSantis crushed it in his reelection bid. And you see that he got an enormous amount of support, in particular from suburbanites and suburban parents. Parents really like the fact that DeSantis has their back, in that you remember that he passed a parental bill of rights. He's been willing to step up and talk about corporations caving in some of these culture wars, whether it be Disney or other companies. We now have this Teacher Paycheck Protection Act, which is a very, very clever political move because what it does substantively, it's a great idea because it's going to allow Florida to attract more teachers at a time when there's a national teacher shortage. So it helps them out there. More substantively and down the road, the paycheck part of this, in which teachers will now have a decision over whether or not they want to join a union and have their dues taken, is likely to diminish the influence of teachers' unions in the state over some of these issues. And at the meantime, it's sending the message politically, look, we do value our teachers. This is not a war against our education establishment whatsoever. It's us standing up against malign influences who want to capture that education establishment, but we support our teachers and we have their backs and we appreciate what they do. Those twin messages that, we're going to protect you parents from the crazy forces that want to take over, but we've got the backs of those who are all about educating. I think that that's a real winner in Florida politics.
Thank you, Kim and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.